My name is Lena, and this is the story of how my husband thought he could play me like a fool. It began with whispers in the dark, bank charges I didn't recognize, and a name I'd never heard before, Talia Voss. Miles, my husband, wasn't just planning to leave me. He was plotting to take everything. My savings, my security, my peace. But he misjudged me. He thought I'd fall apart. Instead, I made the first move. I locked down what was mine, and within a week, everything he planned came crumbling down. But what hurt most wasn't just the betrayal. It was realizing how long he'd been setting the trap, how many lies he'd told with a straight face, how far he was willing to go just to break me. That night, I woke up alone. The cold sheet beside me told me Miles had been gone for a while. At first, I figured he'd gone to the bathroom or maybe grabbed a drink. But as I rubbed the sleep from my eyes, I heard it. His voice. Low. Measured. Almost rehearsed. The hallway was dark, but a sliver of moonlight stretched across the wooden floor. My stomach twisted. Just a little longer. She has no clue yet. I froze mid-step. Miles's voice was calm, the kind of calm you use when you're trying to keep someone from panicking. My pulse kicked up, loud in my ears. Who the hell was he talking to? I leaned closer, careful not to make a sound, but the next words were muffled, his tone dropping to a whisper I couldn't make out. This wasn't a late-night work call. Miles never whispered on work calls. Hell, he never even cared if I overheard him before. My mind raced through a dozen awful possibilities, each one worse than the last. Footsteps. They were getting closer. I rushed back to the bedroom, dove under the covers, and forced myself to lie still. A moment later, I felt the mattress shift under his weight. He settled in like nothing had happened. I turned toward him slowly, blinking like I had just woken up. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice groggy. "Bathroom," he mumbled without missing a beat. "And the call?" He barely flinched. "Client stuff. Just smoothing out a few things for a case." I watched him closely. He looked back, blank as ever. Maybe I was imagining things, but I couldn't unhear that sentence. She has no clue yet. I swallowed hard and turned away, pretending to drift back to sleep. My brain screamed at me, but I didn't confront him. Not that night. Not yet. The next morning, I woke before Callan did. He was still sleeping, one arm thrown over the empty space where I had been lying. I slipped out of bed quietly, grabbed my phone, and padded barefoot to the kitchen. Normally, I never checked our finances. Miles handled that stuff. But today, something felt wrong. I opened the bank app. My stomach dropped. $500, Wab using $200, $750, $2,000. Multiple withdrawals over the last few months, each one just small enough to avoid drawing attention, but altogether, they painted a picture I couldn't ignore. We had a joint account for bills, but we also kept separate accounts for personal expenses. These charges, they weren't for groceries, or utilities, or anything we'd ever talked about. I tightened my grip on the phone. Behind me, footsteps. I quickly locked the screen and turned. Miles stood in the doorway, rubbing the back of his neck. "Morning," he said, his voice still thick with sleep. "What's for breakfast?" I set my phone down slowly. "I was about to ask you the same thing." He gave me a lazy grin and moved to pour himself some coffee. "Guess it's your turn today," he joked. I watched him sip his drink, his hand resting casually on the counter. "I checked our account this morning," I said evenly. He froze for the slightest moment. His fingers tightened around the mug, then he chuckled like it was nothing. "There are a lot of small withdrawals," I added, crossing my arms. Things I don't remember us discussing. He nodded, too casually. Just a few small investments. Business stuff. Nothing major. Short-term gains. He was lying. I could feel it in my bones. But I didn't know what he was hiding. Not yet. The rest of the day, I tried to brush off the discomfort gnawing at me, but Miles made it harder. He was glued to his phone, always stepping out to take calls, and when he set it down, the screen was always face down. It was like he had built a wall, one I hadn't even noticed until now. That night, I lay awake next to him, staring at the ceiling. He slept peacefully, like a man with nothing to hide. But I wasn't convinced. Something was off, and deep down, I knew. The truth was going to be worse than I could imagine. His breathing was slow, steady, the kind of calm that only comes from someone who thinks they've hidden everything perfectly. But I wasn't buying it. A voice deep inside whispered the words I'd been trying to ignore all night. Is this paranoia? Or is something seriously wrong? The doubt clung to me like a second skin, even as sunlight crept through the curtains. I hadn't slept. Not really, just tossed and turned, thoughts looping like a broken reel, replaying every little moment I'd brushed off, every red flag I had ignored for months. And then Miles walked into the kitchen like it was any other morning, like nothing had shifted between us. "Morning, babe," he said, pressing a quick kiss to my temple. I was thinking we should probably organize our finances. You know, just in case of emergencies. I froze, my fingers tightening around my coffee mug. Our finances? I repeated carefully. Yeah, he replied, leaning casually against the counter, sipping from his mug like we were discussing grocery lists. Just wondering if you've got a list of your accounts, passwords, assets, all that. Might be good to keep everything in one place. I stared at him, my pulse thudding in my ears. Miles had never, not once, shown any interest in my personal finances. We had a joint account for bills, sure, but everything else was separate. That had always been the rule. Mutual independence. I swallowed and forced a neutral smile. I guess I could pull something together. His lips curved into a soft grin, but his eyes flickered. Just for a second. He nodded and changed the subject as if he hadn't just dropped a live grenade in the middle of our breakfast. But my thoughts were spiraling. This wasn't about being prepared. This wasn't about us. Miles was getting ready for something, and whatever it was, he didn't want me to see it coming. That evening, he was perfect. Too perfect. He laughed at dumb sitcoms, scrolled through his phone like nothing in the world could bother him. He even suggested takeout from my favorite Thai place. He was playing the loving husband like he was auditioning for an award. And that's what made my skin crawl. It felt fake. Rehearsed. Practiced. Then it happened. He stood up to shower and left his phone on the coffee table, face down, just like always. But he never left that phone unattended. Ever. My heart thudded. I stared at it like it might bite me. Then, a vibration. The screen lit up. A text preview from a name I didn't recognize, Talia Voss. My breath caught. I reached for it without thinking, my hands shaking. I tilted the screen just enough to read, just make sure she stays in the dark. Almost there. The blood drained from my face. Who was Talia Voss? What did almost there mean? I stared at the message, mind racing with possibilities. Was she another woman? Was he about to leave me? Was he stealing from me? I heard the water shut off. Panic surged through me. I placed the phone back exactly where it had been, sat down, and grabbed a pillow, clutching it tightly to steady my trembling hands. Miles strolled back in, towel drying his hair, looking utterly unbothered. "Did you decide on dinner?" he asked, shaking out his damp curls. I looked up at him, my throat dry. "Not yet." He picked up his phone, not even glancing at the screen before unlocking it. No hesitation, no guilt. But now I knew better. The rest of the night, I sat in silence, trying to convince myself I had misunderstood. Maybe it was business. Maybe Talia was a lawyer or a consultant. Maybe keeping me in the dark was about something innocent. But I knew. Deep down, I knew. The late-night calls, the disappearing money, the sudden interest in my accounts, it was all connected. I should have confronted him. Right there. Right then. But if I was right, and Miles was really hiding something this massive, I needed more than suspicion. I needed proof. So I said nothing. I let him kiss me goodnight. Let him slip beneath the covers like everything was normal. But I lay there, gripping my phone in the dark, whispering to myself, who the hell is Talia Voss? The next morning, that question haunted me like a ghost, trailing my every step. I drifted through my routine on autopilot, brushing teeth, making coffee, getting dressed, but none of it registered. All I could think about was that name, that message, Talia Voss. Who was she? And what exactly were they planning? My mind kept looping the same thought like a song I couldn't turn off. Something about Talia Voss didn't fit, like a puzzle piece jammed into the wrong place. At breakfast, Miles sat across from me scrolling through his phone, calm as ever. It was almost convincing. If I hadn't seen that message, did he know? If he did, he was one hell of an actor. Then, like he could feel the suspicion rising off me, he looked up and smiled. "Hey, babe," he said casually. "Can you sign something real quick?" I almost choked on my coffee. "Sign what?" I asked, keeping my voice light. "Just some updates for taxes," he said, sliding a manila folder across the table like it was no big deal. His tone was breezy, but I saw the way his fingers tapped the table, uneven, restless. A tell. I picked up the stack of papers, my stomach nodding as I flipped through the first few pages. Legal terms, property references, transfer agreements. And then it hit me. This wasn't about taxes. I flipped to the last page and froze. It was a property transfer document. My savings, my condo, everything. It would all go into his name. I looked up slowly. Miles was watching me, a polite smile on his face. "Too polite? Too polished?" "Miles," I said, my voice low and too steady. "What is this?" "It's just a precaution, babe. A legal convenience. Nothing changes between us." I stared at him. Was he serious? "Nothing changes?" I said, holding the papers up. "You're asking me to hand over everything I own." "Not everything," he replied smoothly. "Just consolidating things. For protection, you know, in case something happens." I felt the tremor in my hands, not from fear, from fury. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This was calculated. This was a man who had been planning something for a very long time, and he had the nerve to sit there like it was no big deal. I placed the papers back on the table, slow and deliberate. "I'm not signing this." His smile flickered. A muscle ticked in his jaw before he let out a quiet laugh. "Lena, don't be dramatic. It's just paperwork." I didn't flinch. "Then why are you pushing me to sign it without even reading it?" His face darkened. "You really don't want to do this," he said, leaning forward slightly. His voice had dropped. Lower, more measured. There was something under it. Something cold. A threat dressed in sugar. I stared back, unblinking. Is that a threat? He didn't respond right away. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. The smirk vanished. His face went neutral, cold and unreadable. I just think you're making this harder than it needs to be, he said quietly. I clenched my jaw to keep from snapping. He still thought he had control. Still thought I was playing checkers while he played chess. So I smiled, just enough to throw him off. You know what, Miles? I said softly, standing and gathering the papers. You're right. I should think about this. His eyes narrowed, surprised. That wasn't the response he expected. But I had already turned away, walking to the kitchen and setting the documents neatly on the counter. I wasn't going to argue. Not now. Not yet. Because something had changed. I was in control now. That night, Miles acted like none of it had happened. He poured himself a drink, watched the news, laughed at things on his phone. He played the role of a loving husband with ease. But I could see through it. This wasn't a man trying to save a marriage. This was a man preparing to walk away and take everything with him. The next morning, I found him on the couch, sipping his coffee like it was any other day. But when I sat across from him, something shifted. He glanced up and I knew. He felt it too. We need to talk, he said, setting his mug down. I tilted my head, waiting. He sighed, like this was hard for him. Like he was the one being hurt. I think we should separate. There it was, the carefully rehearsed line, delivered like he'd practiced it in front of a mirror. It's not working anymore, he added, his voice measured. I said nothing at first, letting the silence sit heavy between us. Then finally I asked, You've been planning this, haven't you? A flicker crossed his face. Guilt? Hesitation? It vanished too fast to name. It's for the best, Lena. We've grown apart. Grown apart. That was the story he was sticking to? I leaned forward, my eyes locked on his. No, I said slowly. What you mean is, you want out, but you also want to make sure you don't leave empty-handed. He didn't argue. His lips pressed into a thin line, but he didn't deny it. I could have screamed. I could have thrown something, flipped the table, shattered the calm with all the rage building inside me. But I didn't, because something inside me had shifted, solidified. A new kind of steel had taken root, and I was done playing nice. I leaned back in my chair, tilting my head slightly, and said the words that would change everything. I already moved my assets. Miles went rigid. His posture stiffened. His breath caught, barely, but I noticed. His voice dropped, sharp and tight. What do you mean? I smiled. Slow. Purposeful. Exactly what it sounds like. His jaw clenched. I saw it. That exact second he realized he'd lost control. All those months. The planning. The careful manipulation. And I had slipped through his fingers. He hated that. We sat in silence, the air between us thick and charged. Then he exhaled sharply, stood up and grabbed his coffee. He took a long sip, then turned to me with a look that sent a chill through my chest. His smile came back, but this time it was cold, calculated. You're going to regret this, Lena. I didn't know if it was a threat or a bluff, but either way, I was ready. He had made his move. Now it was my turn. The next morning felt heavier somehow. Even the air inside the apartment pressed against me like a weight I couldn't shake. I moved through my routine, coffee, emails, dishes, all the things that used to feel normal. Now they just felt like background noise in a life under siege. I told myself not to let his words from the night before burrow in too deep. But then, the knock came. Firm, cold, official. I set my coffee down and exhaled slowly before opening the door. A man in a navy blazer stood there holding a thick envelope. "Lena Morin?" he asked. I nodded. He handed me the envelope, his face unreadable. "You've been served." My fingers tightened around the papers as I watched him walk away. Even before opening it, I knew exactly what was inside. Still, I forced myself to sit at the kitchen table, slide a nail under the flap, and pull out the contents. Petition for dissolution of marriage. My eyes moved down the page, catching on the numbers, the demands, the bolded sections meant to hit hard. Miles wasn't just leaving. He wanted half. Half the condo, half the car, half of every shared asset. And then, the final slap, spousal support. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head in disbelief. Of course he had planned this long ago, planting seeds, biding time. The man I married had always been cold, but this was methodical. Later that afternoon, I sat in the crisp, modern office of my attorney, the smell of wood polish and printer ink filling the air. She flipped through the stack of documents, lips twitching into a smirk as she landed on the financial breakdown. "Well," Tara said, tapping her pen against the desk, "he's got nothing." I raised an eyebrow. "Just like that?" She looked up amused. "Just like that. You moved everything into a trust before he filed, which means legally he's got no access. He can try for spousal support, but considering your income history versus his, yeah, not happening." I let out a long breath, my shoulders releasing tension I hadn't realized I was still carrying. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to power. Miles had been so sure he was the puppet master, but he'd never counted on me cutting my own strings. That evening, I had just finished pouring a glass of wine when the front door flew open. I didn't even flinch. Miles stormed in, fury trailing behind him like a shadow. His tie was loose, his jaw clenched tight enough to crack a tooth. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" His voice was low, poisonous. I took a slow sip of my wine, letting it settle on my tongue. "I think I'm finally protecting myself." His fists curled at his sides. "You planned this." I set the glass down, tilting my head. "So did you." Silence stretched, thick with accusation. Finally, he exhaled through his nose, dark eyes narrowing. "This isn't over." I watched him. I didn't say a word. I had won the first round, but I knew better than to think he'd just walk away. The next sign came at work. Not all at once, but in quiet, unsettling shifts, lingering glances, conversations that stopped when I entered the room, side eyes and stiff smiles. By mid-morning, my assistant stepped into my office hesitantly. "Hey, I think you should know something," she said, her voice tight. I looked up from my laptop, already weary. "What is it, Naomi?" She wrung her hands, clearly uncomfortable. "There's a rumor going around. I wasn't going to say anything, but..." She paused, then finally blurted it out. "People are saying you took money from the joint accounts, that you were laundering it." I froze. The words landed like a slap. I blinked. "What?" "I don't believe it," she rushed to say, "but Miles, he's been talking to people, lawyers, mutual friends, and now the story's spreading." My stomach twisted. So that was his next move. He hadn't just lost. He wanted to make sure I burned with him. Her words hit like a slap. "I don't believe it," Naomi added quickly. "But Miles, he's been talking to people, lawyers, Friends you two used to share. The stories spreading. My stomach turned, rage igniting like a match inside my chest. He wasn't just trying to bleed me financially, he was trying to destroy me. By the time I stepped into Tara's office, I was barely holding it together. My hands shook as I slammed a stack of printed screenshots onto her desk. This needs to stop. Now. She flipped through the papers, letting out a dry, humorless chuckle. Well, he's getting desperate. He's slandering me, I said, barely containing the fury in my voice. Yes, Tara nodded, but we can use that. She leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen rhythmically against the desk. If he's running around making false accusations, he's opened the door to defamation. We start with a cease and desist. If he ignores it, we escalate. I clenched my jaw. I don't want this to drag out in court. I just want him to stop. Tara let out a slow breath. He's baiting you, Lena. He wants a reaction. She's right. I turned to the doorway, where Beatrix, Tara's paralegal, stood with a knowing look. If you react too fast, he wins, Beatrix added, stepping into the room. I nodded stiffly, swallowing the storm building inside me. But deep down, I was seething. Miles wanted a war? He was about to get one. I found him at Verdun, a sleek, high-end restaurant in the heart of downtown, one of those places with mood lighting, imported wine lists, and quiet corners meant for powerful conversations. He was laughing with two colleagues, a glass of bourbon in hand, as if he hadn't spent the past few days dragging my name through the mud. I didn't scream. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't have to. I walked straight to his table, leaned in and whispered, "You have no idea what you've just started." For a moment, his smirk faltered. Just a flicker. Then he masked it with a cool grin, dabbing the corner of his mouth with a napkin. His eyes gleamed. "Let's see what you've got then." That was the last warning I would give him. No more playing fair. Miles had spent weeks trying to manipulate me, humiliate me, break me. But now? He was about to find out exactly what I was capable of. I was halfway through my morning coffee when the phone rang. "Tara?" I answered, already feeling that tight sense of urgency creeping in. "You need to come in," she said. "No preamble. Now." Miles just filed a motion for a full financial audit. My blood ran cold. I set the mug down carefully, fingers tightening around the edge of the table. "On what grounds?" "He's claiming you mismanaged joint funds," she said, her tone sharp, irritated. "And that you owe him a financial settlement." I exhaled, anger surging. He's not trying to win. He's trying to wear me down. Exactly. It's not about truth. It's about time, money, stress. He's playing the long game. I didn't hesitate. "I'll be there in an hour." By the time I arrived, Tara already had the motion printed, highlighted, and spread across her desk, every line marked in red ink. "Here's the good news," she said, looking up. "He doesn't have a single piece of solid evidence. And the bad news? If the court doesn't throw this out immediately, it could drag on. Weeks, maybe months." I clenched my fists. "What's our move?" "We counterfile, request dismissal, and we demand he pay for all legal fees if the court sees this for what it is, stall tactics and harassment." A slow smile spread across my face. "Let's do it." 2 weeks later, I sat across from Miles in a courtroom for the first time. He was dressed like a man who thought he was going to win. Navy suit, tight tie, polished shoes. His smirk tugged at the corner of his lips, barely concealed. He thought this was his moment. His lawyer stood. "Your Honor," he began smoothly, "my client believes Mrs. Morin transferred assets improperly to avoid a fair divorce settlement. We're requesting a full forensic audit of all financial activity from the past 6 months. I didn't react. I didn't blink. And beside me, Tara rose with poise and precision. Your Honor, she said, adjusting her glasses, every financial move my client made was executed before Mr. Morin even filed for divorce. There is no evidence of mismanagement or fraud. She pushed a thick binder forward. In fact, we are requesting this motion be dismissed with prejudice, and we ask the court to hold Mr. Morin responsible for all associated legal costs. This is not a legal concern. This is financial harassment. The judge read through the files slowly, expression unreadable. The room was so silent you could hear the pages turn. Miles stared at me, waiting for me to crack. I didn't give him the satisfaction. Finally, the judge looked up. The court finds no basis for a financial audit. The motion is denied. A pause. And due to the lack of supporting evidence, Mr. Morin will be responsible for all legal fees related to this claim. The gavel struck once. Sharp. Final. Just like that. Miles lost again. Outside the courtroom, he walked past me, stiff and silent. But as he passed, he muttered low, just loud enough for me to hear, "You think this is over? Just wait." I didn't turn around. I didn't need to, because if he thought I was done fighting, he hadn't seen anything yet. Miles brushed past me in silence, but just as he passed, he leaned in and muttered under his breath, "You think this is over? Just wait. I had won this round." But men like Miles don't walk away. They don't accept defeat. They pause, regroup, strategize. And then they come back meaner, crueler, and far more dangerous. He had invested too much into this plan to simply let it die. And I didn't have to wait long to find out what his final move would be. The next morning, my phone rang. Tara's name lit up the screen. "Lena," she said, her voice clipped. "We've got a problem." I sat up straighter. "What now?" There was a pause, papers shuffling on the other end, and then, "Miles and Talia just filed a formal complaint. They're accusing you of financial fraud." My heart dropped. "They're claiming you falsified financial records for months." The air left my lungs in a single sharp breath. This wasn't just another game. If this accusation stuck, I wouldn't just lose money. I could lose everything. I could face criminal charges. "They submitted forged documents," Tara continued. "And Lena, they're convincing. If the court takes them seriously, you'll be under full investigation." The room swayed slightly. I pressed my fingers against my temple, grounding myself. "Are they real?" I whispered. Tara scoffed. "No, but they're good. Someone clearly doctored them. And let me guess. Talia?" "Of course. The ghost behind every scheme." But then Tara added, "Beatrix caught something." A flicker of hope lit in my chest. "What is it?" She recognized the timestamps on the so-called transfers. The accounts listed in those transactions? They didn't even exist when the transfers supposedly happened. I let out a sharp, shaky exhale. There it was, the crack that would shatter their entire case. My fear dissolved, replaced by something else. Resolve. Miles wanted a war? I was ready to finish it. By the time I arrived at Tara's office, I had already made up my mind. I didn't want to just defend myself. I wanted to destroy them. "I'm done playing defense," I said, placing both hands on her desk. "I want to go on the offensive." Tara studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Good," she said, "because we've got enough." She pushed a folder toward me. We had a forensic analyst review everything. They confirmed what Beatrix found. The documents were fabricated. Every single one. A grin played at the corner of her mouth. So here's the plan. We file a motion proving the documents are fraudulent, and then we sue them. Miles and Talia. Defamation, falsifying evidence, and we go after full damages. I nodded once. I want them both held accountable. No more mercy. Tara leaned back in her chair, clearly pleased. I thought you might say that. 2 weeks later, I faced Miles in court for what I knew would be the last time. I watched him carefully as Tara stood and presented our case. Her words were clear, sharp, every sentence deliberate, slicing clean through their lies. These documents submitted by Mr. Morin and Ms. Voss, she said, were fabricated. We have irrefutable evidence that the listed transactions never occurred. In fact, the financial accounts referenced didn't exist at the time. The forensic analyst took the stand, walking the court through the timestamps, the digital trails, and the subtle inconsistencies that proved manipulation. Miles's legal team squirmed. They knew. They were losing. And then, the knockout. Tara slid a new folder across the bench. Your Honor, she said, in light of this, my client is countersuing Mr. Morin and Ms. Voss for defamation and the submission of falsified legal documents. The courtroom went silent. Miles' attorney turned to him, whispering urgently. His jaw was locked. His face had gone pale. Finally, his lawyer stood and cleared his throat. Your Honor, my client wishes to withdraw all claims. Of course he did. He had no other choice. The judge nodded. Motion dismissed. Furthermore, Mr. Morin is ordered to pay all legal fees associated with this case. The gavel fell. Miles had lost. Completely. Outside the courtroom, he walked past me again, silent. I didn't stop him. I didn't need to. I waited until he was a few steps ahead, then said, just loud enough for him to hear, "We done here?" He didn't answer, but I didn't need him to, because for the first time in months, I felt something I'd forgotten how to feel. Peace. No more court dates. No more threats. No more waking up wondering what he'd try next. I had won. It wasn't some cinematic victory. No fireworks. No dramatic speeches, just silence, the kind that follows a storm. And for once, that silence didn't scare me. 2 days later, I met with Tara for the last time. She slid a folder across her desk. It's done, she said with finality. Miles signed the settlement. I stared at the papers for a moment before finally picking them up. I flipped through the final terms, even though I already knew the outcome. Miles got nothing, not a cent. His claims dismissed. His case shattered, his reputation in ruins. He tried to take everything from me, my money, my name, my future. But in the end, he was the one left with nothing. Tara leaned back in her chair, watching me quietly. So, how do you feel? I let out a small laugh, more breath than sound, but it was real. Lighter, I said. She smiled. Good. You deserve that. I nodded, slipping the signed settlement into my bag. This was it. The final step. I stood and extended my hand. Thank you, Tara, for everything. She shook it firmly. Go enjoy your life, Lena. You've earned it, and for the first time in a long time, I believed her. That evening, my best friend Beatrix and my mother Vivian insisted we celebrate. A proper victory dinner. When I stepped into my mother's home, she wrapped me in the kind of hug that said, "Thank God it's over." "It's done," she whispered. I nodded. "It's over." Beatrix popped a bottle of champagne, raising her glass with a grin that sparkled. "To freedom," she said, "and to never letting a man think he can outsmart you again." I laughed, clinking my glass against hers. "I'll drink to that." We ate, we talked, we remembered what joy felt like. And for the first time in months, I wasn't bracing for the next hit. The war was over. Later that night, I stood on my balcony, looking out over the lights of Portwell, the city glittering all the way to the horizon. Everything felt different now. I wasn't the woman who had ignored her gut. I wasn't the woman who had clung to the illusion of safety, of permanence. I had lost things, time, trust, the idea of love I thought I understood. But I had gained more than I ever expected. Strength, clarity, control. My phone buzzed. An unknown number lit up the screen. I didn't even blink. Blocked. I turned back to my laptop and opened a blank document. A new chapter. A new story. Mine. I tapped the keyboard softly, then whispered to myself, "This is my story now. Before we close, I want to leave you with this. Life has a way of testing us when we least expect it. Sometimes the people we trust the most are the very ones who hurt us the deepest. But here's what I've learned. Strength isn't about avoiding betrayal. It's about how you rise after it. When I stood on the edge of my marriage, of everything I thought I knew, I could have let it crush me. I could have let fear, shame, and doubt tear me down. But I didn't. I chose to fight, not just for my finances, but for my dignity, for my freedom, for my future. And if there's one thing I hope you take from this story, it's this. You are stronger than you think. If you've ever been blindsided, if you've ever felt like the ground disappeared beneath you, you are not alone. Life will throw its worst at you, but it's in those moments that you discover who you really are. And sometimes, walking away from what no longer serves you is the most powerful victory of all.